everyone. Welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Friday, June 9th, 2023. I'm Simon Rafe, here with my two co-hosts, Kyle Copey and Christine Niles. And sitting in the fourth chair is Nick Wiley. Hey, Nick, how you doing?
Hey, Simon, doing well.
Good, good. A priest has pleaded guilty to possession of materials depicting children being sexually abused. This, of course, is a very delicate topic. A particular note, YouTube restricts the language that we can use to describe this. We're not allowed to use the words child pornography without YouTube removing the video. Therefore, obviously, there's going to be portions of this that may be bleeped out, there may be lack of audio, and we're going to be using words such as child sexual abuse material or things like that. The reason that we're doing that, like I say, is so that we can put this out on YouTube and so that it can be seen by as many people as possible. This is a very important story. It's a story that it's important to discuss, to get to as many people as possible. But we're certainly not wanting to make light of it or use a euphemism. We're just having to deal with this kind of, automatic artificial intelligence, digital bots scrubbing their playground. Anyway, Christine, I believe you are the right person to start this off today. This has been your story. You've been on this story since the very beginning. You've done excellent work on this. So please, tell us what's going on.
Sure. Thanks, Simon. It is the sad conclusion to a sordid saga involving Father James Jackson of the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, the FSSP, a priestly group that offers the traditional liturgy. Jackson is a high-ranking priest and former rector of the FSSP Seminary in Nebraska. He was arrested in November 2021 after a months-long sting, and a raid turned up a laptop and hard drive with 12,000 images and 1,300 video files of the worst child sex abuse material. Immediately, the trad world leapt to his defense, claiming Jackson must have been framed by the feds, his computer hacked, and the hard drive planted. There was no evidence in this specific situation to support these theories, but many trads insisted on it. When Church Militant refused to buy into their wild speculation, we were attacked, maligned, smeared, and told our reporting was, quote, an attack on tradition. Never mind that I've been attending the traditional Latin Mass for 20 years. It was an attack on tradition. Now, some of this continued even after Jackson was arrested a second time while he was out on bond, staying with his sister in Kansas. In July 2022, local police arrested him after they found yet another laptop and hard drive containing pornographic images of children. What's more, Jackson admitted in court in November just last year that the government had probable cause to prove he possessed child sex abuse material. Still, his diehard supporters refused to believe he could be guilty. Yesterday, after nearly 2 years of this criminal process, Jackson loyalists had to face the cold reality. After Jackson pled guilty to possession of child porn, the assistant U.S. attorney spent 10 minutes reading in graphic and explicit detail some of the files found, including nude, prepubescent females, as well as babies and toddlers being forced to engage in sex acts with adults, with objects, or with animals. After this, the judge asked Jackson if he understood the charge against him. He said yes. The judge asked if he disagreed with anything the prosecutor said. He said no. In short, he admitted to all of it. His sentencing takes place on September 11th, and he faces up to 20 years in prison. So I'm glad that this has finally come to an end. But it was interesting how viciously attacked we were from the very beginning, simply for refusing to buy into their speculation and their conspiracy theories.
I want to just say at this point, just obviously stop you there, Christine, and jump in and to say, we were viciously attacked. I mean, okay, you were viciously attacked. Let's be honest right now that certainly there was a degree of attacking of Church Militant and smearing us in general, and kind of, a lot of the sort of things being flung around splashed onto us, the mud, let's say, that people were flinging around splashed onto us and Church Militant in general. But the attacks against you personally, and not just a question of, okay, we're going to personally attack Christine Niles, but those attacks were personal. They were attacks that were directed at you in these were not directed in terms of the coverage that you had done, the decisions you had made in reporting, the conclusions you had drawn, the facts that you had reported, none of that. Many of these things were specific attacks against you, against your ethnicity, against your sex, against your personal history, all of these things, that this was what happened. That these people, in leaping to the defense of a man who is now admitted to what is quite possibly the most heinous crime extant, in leaping to his defense, they went after and just personally attacked a fellow Catholic woman. That is like, I am done with sympathy for these people.
Yeah, I actually wanted to read some of the tweets that we received back then. And once again, I have to clarify, because people have accused us of throwing this priest under the bus and all sorts of things and attacking him. We never attacked Father Jackson. We didn't throw him under the bus. We simply factually reported on the evidence. And because we refused to buy into these claims that, oh, he was framed by the feds and he's so holy, and the fact that we simply refused to buy into that made us the enemy. So, for instance, Brother Martin Navarro, who is now Father Martin, who was ordained by a schismatic old Catholic bishop, said back on November 18th.
I think jury's out on whether or not he's actually a father. I think honestly it is. I don't know. I would need a very competent canon lawyer to rule on that one.
Yeah, I don't know.
But, as a courtesy, Father.
This is what he tweeted on November 18th, 2021, in response to Church Militant, saying, "We know a lot more about Father Jackson than Mike Pierrick does. It will all come out eventually. There were things we couldn't say at the time." So he responds, "What's awesome is when he," meaning Jackson, "wins, everyone will know his name and will never forget." Okay. Some other tweets where, let's see, let me find them real fast. Sorry, this is a long article. Oh, one lady said I had a black heart. Okay, she said I had a black heart for daring to say anything against her holy priest. Another woman named Nina Rose said, "I know him personally, Father Jackson, and I would trust him with my children. How dare you?" We got so many. How dare you attack this holy priest? And wait for the trial to come out and everything will, he'll. Even this morning, literally this morning, I saw a tweet from someone alluding to the possibility that Father Jackson simply pled guilty because he ran out of money. I mean, that's just how, I don't even know what to say in the face of that kind of thing. I don't even know what to say.
You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you.
Exactly. But look, they'll look for any excuse. So
yeah, I mean, I can't believe that there are still, apparently, as you say, still Father Jackson defenders out there, still these conspiracy theorists who are like, he's really innocent. It's like, no, all the evidence has come out based on our reporting, and I'm just waiting for like the Sister Lucia conspiracy theory. Oh, it's a fake Father Jackson. They really killed him.
They killed him. Like, they replaced him with someone else.
Yeah. It is very disturbing. And obviously, there's a degree of humor in the ridiculousness of this, and I think that's the only way that you can actually respond to some of this most ridiculous sort of thing. But all through this, there has been this level of knee-jerk defense of Father Jackson, and as well there has been a sort of a willful blindness and a willful unwillingness to engage with the fact that this was actually like child sex abuse material. That's what this was. These were not like regular immodest images. These weren't Playboy or something like that. These weren't, pictures of consenting adults engaged in sex. These were children who were obviously being abused. Your children cannot consent, and certainly, in these particular cases, there is no way that anybody would consent to the things that happen there. The statement from the FSSP, which came out yesterday, from the Fraternal Society of St. Peter, came out yesterday. Until Father Jackson was arrested, the Fraternity of St. Peter was not aware of anything in his words or behavior that could give rise to suspicion concerning such actions. Crimes of this type are execrable, and Catholics should pray for the victims of pornography and work to put an end to its industry. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff to unpack there. The first one is, until Father Jackson was arrested, there was nothing in his words or behavior that could give rise to suspicion. Okay, that's a very carefully nuanced statement. I don't know, but generally speaking, when these cases happen, there's a reason the feds crash down your door with a hydraulic ram, and it's because there's been a report of concerns of something like that. So perhaps no, not in anything that you knew of Father Jackson's words or behavior, but wasn't this reported at some point? Didn't somebody make some sort of noise? And to be fair, if you have that little oversight and that little knowledge of your priests when they're engaging in this level, thousands and thousands and thousands of images, you know, and all of this kind of thing, and you don't know, there's a great degree of concern. And then Catholics should pray for the victims of pornography. Absolutely, yes, very true. You, Nick, have made your, your position on this very clear, that pornography should be banned. It shouldn't be, allowed, even under the First Amendment and so forth. Very, strong. And,
when he runs for president.
When he runs for president, yeah, there you go. And I'll be his AG, and we'll make this work. And put a work to end its industry. Absolutely, 100%. This is not, okay, this isn't Playboy. This isn't what it is. This isn't Playboy. This isn't your dad's top shelf mag. This isn't, a VHS that comes in a brown paper envelope in the mail or something like that. That's not what this is, okay? This isn't, some pretty girl from Kansas with stars in her eyes who got involved in the wrong bit of Hollywood and she's consenting to it. It's not that. This is children being abused. This is the most and the fact that at no point was it there in the statement. It's like, yeah, you've tried to sort of almost pass this off as this is just like, yeah, Father Jackson was caught with, he was caught with some dirty mags. That's not what happened.
It's a problem, because I know that there's some people who are very upset with the FSSP statement because they failed to make the distinction between exactly what you said, pornography between consenting adults and pornography. Sorry, we're not allowed to say that word. Obviously, both are evil, clearly, and both are exploitative, but there's a vast difference between one and the other. It actually reminds me of the Society of St. Pius X statement in response to one of their priests who just pled guilty a few months ago to molesting his 9-year-old niece over the course of 3 years. So it actually started when she was 6 through the age of 9. He molested her, he abused her in the worst ways. He pled guilty to doing that, okay? So now he's facing his time. And the response from the society, which actually took 3 or 4 days to come out, after I kept asking them, are you going to issue a statement on this? Are you going to say anything about this? They finally did after 3 days. And they said instead, how they framed it was, this was a grave violation against chastity. That's how they framed it. So I'm sorry, it just kind of reminds me a little bit of that. And with regard to any warning signs about Father Jackson, I'm going to give the FSP leadership the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that there were any people reporting him for child abuse or anything like that. But I have spoken with former parishioners of his, current as well as former, going back 20 years, and they have told me there were warning signs with him. For instance, when he was in Oklahoma, he was known to really want to hang out with the teens. He always wanted to be around the teens. He loved, and he would favor some teens and then not favor others. And then they started getting younger. He started showing a lot of attention to the really young ones, especially the girls, like the 10-year-olds. And even back then, this parishioner was concerned. But, with the parents, of course, trusting the priest, especially if he's a traditional priest, of course, they would never think of anything like that. So I've heard things from parishioners saying there were definitely warning signs. I also heard from a different parishioner who years ago reported one seminarian at the FSP seminary for grooming and inappropriate behavior, boundary violations with teen girls. She reported that directly to Father Jackson, and he pretty much just sort of dismissed it. So,
I mean, the claim that Father Jackson had no, he was so holy and everyone liked him and he was such a traditional priest and all that, and then the FSSP statement, which they very well made the case that they didn't see or hear or know anything. We don't know it, but that's what they said. All that really tells me is that this guy was really good at hiding it. From what I understand, he was a very regimented man, and that's why, people would respect him in terms of his spirituality. He would go on these long hikes after Mass or whatever, and they were like, oh, he's a very strict, by-the-book guy. Well, that can translate into evil too. You can use that regimented style for evil, and it just seems like he was just really good at hiding it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always, the hindsight 2020 thing. And so, of course, they are now looking back like, oh, okay, that could have been a sign. But these things, you want a priest who seems like he really cares for his parishioners, especially the next generation of those parishioners and stuff. And so it's not, I hate to be like, oh, if the priest looks like, he just likes to talk to women, or he just likes to talk to men, or he hangs things out around children. We need to be really worried about him. Like, yes, you need to be cautious of everyone in today's world, which is the saddest part of today's world, is you have to be cautious around everyone. But I hate to take these bad instances and then all of a sudden now we just are schizophrenic about everyone we come across, or if anyone does anything, it's like you're just like complete blind to them, because that's really one of the saddest things. Is I've lived most of my life like just walking down the street, say hey to everybody, whatever, want to assume everyone is of goodwill. But then you see that's one of the things that the media has done so well, is like they've made us just so suspicious of everyone just because of, oh, you know, these people are targeting these people. Like you get around people of different races or sexual orientations, and you think they're out to kill you because that's what the media tries to tell you and all. And so it's one of those things where we do have to have proper discernment and just proper boundaries with everyone, but we also can't just be totally suspicious of everyone we come across.
No, and I think that there's something really that is kind of within that notion, within that idea that has happened, and it's absolutely awful. It's the fact that many people, because they had this loyalty to Father Jackson or to the FSSP or to the traditionalist movement in general, or just to the idea of this priest couldn't do this thing because he was very holy, because he had a devotion to the Latin Mass, because he was very regimented, however you want to say it. People are starting to lose their faith over this, you know, and there's a quote here. Actually, there's a lady called Kathleen left a comment, and I'm going to read the comment because it's really good. And she says, "I really don't want to go to Mass anymore after this. I saw the FSSP as a pure and untainted part of the Catholic Church until now. Who knows what our local priests are up to? Can I trust them again?" And you know, I feel for what Kathleen is saying there. I mean, obviously, Kathleen is 100% wrong, and it's coming from a wrong place. Your foundation would say, I saw the FSSP as a pure and untainted part of the Catholic Church. The FSSP is made up of human beings, okay? So there is a wonderful scene, and it's wonderfully illustrative. There's a wonderful scene in the Prince Caspian from the Chronicles of Narnia. And in Prince Caspian, it is revealed to Caspian where he and his entire race of people, the Telmarines, came from. And they came from pirates. They were pirates who ended up in Narnia, and they grew, and they were pirates who had kind of captured native women and so forth and taken them by force. And Caspian is like, I was a prince, you know, and now you tell me this, and I had hoped I'd come from a more noble lineage. And Aslan says to him, you come from the Lord Adam and the Lady Eve, and that is enough to bow the head of any emperor and raise the head of any beggar. And that is a key point. The FSSP is made up of sons of Adam and daughters of Eve. It is made up of human beings. It is made up from the same material as produced Judas and the same material who produced St. Peter. That's absolutely it, 100%. They are not a pure and untainted part of the church. They are part of the Catholic Church, with all of its saints and all of its sinners and all of its problems. Each individual person is not purely good or purely evil. They do good things, they do bad things, they engage in these things. That is the problem. The moment you come and you say, well, I'm going to place this group of people on a pedestal because this is how I see them, because they present themselves as doing this wonderful holy stuff. Of course, absolutely. Every single priest, you look at him, you should think, wow, what do I see him do? I see him forgive my sins. I see him confect the Eucharist. I see him lead processions. I see him pray. I see him do these things. You should think, my gosh, this man is incredibly holy. You know what? He's a dude. He has all these same struggles and same difficulties we all do. So this is the first thing, that we cannot place any of these people on a pedestal. To say, can I trust them again? Yes, you should trust people. You should trust people, absolutely, because it's the only way to not give yourself into this monstrous, horrible, paranoid world where you're isolated from all things. But, in the words of Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. Take care. Take care with these regards of things, you know. And the other thing where she says, I really don't want to go to Mass anymore. You know what? Cowboy up. I have no sympathy with that, because the Mass is not about the priest who offers it. The moment it is about the priest who offers it, you fall into the trap that all of these trads are throwing at the Novus Ordo correctly. Oh, this is a performance by the priest. This isn't the Mass. Okay, the moment you come along and you're like, well, the FSSP or the SSPX or this Latin Mass Society or whomever, they're offering this very reverent, wonderful, maybe even offering a wonderful Reverend Novus Ordo Mass. This priest is so wonderful, and without him I won't go. Well, okay, you've missed the point. You're going for Jesus. It doesn't matter if there's some numpty up there who's, prancing around dressed as a clown or whatever, provided he's not actually making the Mass invalid. It's still Jesus, it's still Eucharist. You can still get the graces from it, and you're required to go. You're required to go because that's what God asks of you. And yeah, that is the thing that I would say to everyone. I understand your pain, I understand your frustration, but you are coming at it from a wrong perspective and you are going to a wrong place.
That's pretty much the worst response you can give in response to abuse is stop going to Mass, stop receiving the sacraments. For one, as you mentioned, it's a mortal sin. You violate your holy day obligation. But two, you're depriving yourself of the life-giving sacraments. Yeah. You're hurting yourself. Why would you deprive yourself of the Holy Eucharist, of the sacrament of confession, or any of the other wonderful sacraments that give us life and help save us? Why would you do that? I mean, that's exactly what Satan wants. So this response of, oh, I don't want to go to Mass anymore, I'm going to leave the church entirely, it's that problem of you're taking too extreme of an attitude in one direction or another. It's simply naive to claim or think that any part of the church or any organization is pure and untainted. It's simply naive. There is no part of the church that is pure and untainted. Christ alone.
Yeah, and we are deceived unknowingly. We don't know when we're being deceived until it's revealed later on. Jesus knew from the start Judas was going to betray him and allowed it to happen still. Still stayed around, went through everything that he knew he had to go through, still allowed Judas to betray him. And so that's one of the parts about this whole detachment thing that the saints are so keen on is you have to be detached from everything. Jesus says you have to hate mother and father for me. If they're not in line with me, don't go to hell with them. Follow me. It's all about keeping your eyes on Jesus, his church. They are going, if you ever put your trust in the institution and the person, you will be let down left and right. You will end up leaving the church the day you fix your eyes on the human aspect and not on the aspect of Jesus himself is the one who saves us.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I was trying to warn people back in 2021. They all attacked me over it. But here's the thing. Obviously, I'm an investigative journalist. I specialize in exposing clergy sex abuse. I've done this for years. So I'm very familiar with all this. And every single time that we report on a particular priest, every time without fail, the community around the priest rallies around the priest. It doesn't matter where you are, if you're trad or novus ordo, every single time, there's always the contingent of people who say, there's no way he could do this, he is holy, I will never believe it, there's no way. And I'm trying to warn people when the Father Jackson news came out, like, listen, don't fall into that trap. Don't place your faith in this man, because I'm very worried if you place your faith in this man and one day you find out he's guilty, your faith is going to be totally shattered. You must trust Christ alone in his church, who promised that the gates of hell shall not prevail against his church. He promised that. He promised to preserve a faithful remnant. You just stay in that remnant. Be sure you're part of that remnant. And that's not by placing your trust in this one single priest, because that's a huge mistake.
And Jackson allowed all of those people to support him in that way. He
despicable.
Never offered any public apology. He's like, look, guys, I am guilty. Just kind of back off for now. He allowed, working hand in hand with the pastor at his old parish, Father Daniel Nolan, back in Littleton, Colorado. The parish was putting out things like, hey, you can, we're going to do a fundraiser for Father Jackson. We're going to have food drives for him. We're going to even offer holy hours for him. It's like you don't know any of the facts of the case. You're just presuming his innocence. And it even seemed like the parish was alluding to the fact that the parishioners could write letters in defense. And so parishioners thought they could actually defend Father Jackson by sending letters to the court. But that's not how it works, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it really is a big problem. And it goes to the wider issue of this culture of groupthink and fostering this cult loyalty that I knew that happened in the SSPX, all right? I knew that. Obviously, I have been viciously attacked by the SSPX loyalists. I knew they were this sort of this blind cult-like attachment and veneration of their priests. I did not expect it in the FSSP. So that's why I was very surprised when we simply factually reported on the facts of Father Jackson, and we didn't buy into these theories and this wild speculation, that we got attacked so viciously. And I thought, okay, there's this same sort of culture and groupthink that's being fostered in certain segments of the FSP, not all of them, but for instance, you bring up Father Daniel Nolan. He bears some responsibility for this. He's the one who took over the Littleton, Colorado parish, where Father Jackson was for a very long time. Then he went to Providence, Rhode Island, but Father Daniel Nolan took over. He was key in promoting the narrative that Father Jackson was framed. He was speaking privately to parishioners saying, I know he was framed, I know he's guilty. He's the one who's pushing everybody. Let's raise money for him, all of that. And so, of course, the parishioners are going to follow the lead of the priest. And I spoke with parishioners. You know, they didn't want to, they were afraid. They said they were afraid to express any opposite opinion that he could possibly be guilty because they knew that they would be socially ostracized in the parish.
It's interesting because this is the scenario you see play out in every single example, not just with priests and not just with sex abuse. Every single time there's some awful mass shooting or that some serial killer is discovered, you know, there's been multiple bodies have been turning up, nobody knows, and eventually the FBI gets a break and they find the person. And it's always like, well, we had no idea. This person, say their neighbors, he was this quiet man. He kept himself to himself. You know, the person who snaps and goes on some, you know, grotesque shooting rampage or whatever, it's always like, well, he was very well-mannered and nice and polite and quiet and all these things, and it's always this thing. Every single priest, you said it, Christine, doesn't matter if they're traditional or, you know, less than traditional, doesn't matter if they're like, you know, regular Novus Ordo, traditional out of Mass, FSSP, SSPX, it's always, oh, he's such a holy man. It's like, okay, we're always complaining that there are no holy priests. Apparently, the only thing that's required to actually, like, canonize you is for you to be accused of some awful crime, and then everyone comes out and says, oh, he's so holy, he couldn't have done this. I remember when my pastor, Father Edward Perrone, who we've covered on Church Militant, was accused of sex abuse. And multiple people came out and were saying, oh, Father Perrone couldn't do that. Father Perrone couldn't do that. And I remember myself at the time saying, that is what they say about everyone. Yeah. Do I believe that Father Perrone could do it? No, I do not, but I have to admit that I've heard every single other person say it. Now, as it happens, the entire case against Father Perrone was a complete crock of malarkey, as Joe Biden might say. It was totally made up. There was zero evidence whatsoever. It was completely dismissed, thrown out in secular court by Rome, etc., etc. I think Father Perrone holds the distinction of the only man to have been restored to ministry after such an accusation. You know, so Father Perrone is, you know, absolutely 100% innocent. But the point being is that the knee-jerk reaction of, well, I know this man and he's holy. Joe Enders and I, we do our Hardline show together, and we've discussed this a couple of times. I think in a week or two we have a show coming up where we discuss it. This danger of looking at priests and saying, oh, he's a holy man. It's like, you have no idea if he is holy. What you know is you know that he goes and he puts out these signs and these symbols and he does these things, and absolutely 100%. A holy man will say the rosary every day. A holy man will offer a reverent mass. A holy man will make holy hours. But you know what? That doesn't mean you can't tell. The only way to know if a man is holy is when the church says he's a saint.
Yeah, and another thing I want to mention as well, because I think we can't let this pass over in silence, is the double standard of traditionalist media, the double standard of trad leaders and trad figures who absolutely either refused to discuss the Father Jackson case or they leapt to his defense. For instance, I'm going to call out Eric Sammons of Crisis Magazine. He's editor-in-chief of Crisis. He's done lots of good things. He's said some good things. I actually find him to be a bit more on the balanced side when it comes to various aspects of traditionalism. But he published a piece in Crisis right around this time in November when the whole controversy was exploding on social media about Father Jackson. And it was essentially a piece defending Father Jackson and saying, you know, hey, maybe he was framed. Now, he did write one throwaway line about, okay, but if in the end it turns out that he's guilty, I will want the harshest penalties for him. Fine, one throwaway line, but he devotes the vast majority of his article to the possibility that he was framed. He doesn't say anything about that controversial fundraiser with RTF Mike Parrott that raised almost $150,000 for him in 1 week. And I mean, I called him out on it. I called Sammons out and I said, this is a horrible article. You're promoting the narrative that he could have been framed by the feds based on zero evidence whatsoever. And you're not addressing any of the other items. For instance, the fact that to this day, he has never issued a public statement personally proclaiming his innocence. Never, not once. And I was pointing that out to everybody. Hey, most accused clergy, when they're accused, almost immediately within 24 hours say, I vehemently deny this. Father Prone did that.
Yes.
Almost every single clergyman that I've reported on will do that within 24 hours. And I said,
every single accused person.
Yeah, and I said, don't you all think it's a little strange that he, and I would hear the wildest things like, oh, well, maybe he's just being quiet like Jesus before, Pilate. Maybe, and I'm just like, I can't believe I'm dealing with this. So, I just can't believe.
So to go into that narrative right there, so Saint Teresa talks about this. Which one am I thinking of? So the Carmelite one. So
there's so many Saint Teresas.
Yeah,
Saint Francis.
There's Saint Teresa of Avila.
Saint Teresa of Avila. Yeah, so Saint Teresa of Avila talks about whenever.
It's been a long week, Nick.
When the only time you should defend yourself, she says, is when something openly scandalous that would affect the faithful is said about you. She talks about not complaining ever, basically only to like your direct superior who can actually do something about it. So if you have a problem with someone, you bring it to that person. If there are things that need to be solved, you only take it to people who directly can make the impact on that situation. You don't go around gossiping. She says a lot about gossiping and idle words and how they're going to send people to hell and all that. But she talks about the one time when you should make these statements is whenever someone is saying something about you that's so scandalous that it would cause, all this division and things in here. So this is the one time when you should not be like Jesus and say all these and just shut your mouth before the public.
Because it did lead to scandalizing, and that, which is why, as you mentioned, it was despicable. It was despicable that Father Jackson allowed this to go on for as long as he did, almost 2 years. If he had any integrity at all, he would have immediately come out and said, I am sorry. I apologize. I made this. I'm sorry. Please pray for me. If he had any integrity, instead, he allowed all of his supporters to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for him and then defend him vigorously on social media and everywhere and go through all this horrible emotional turmoil and agony trying to defend their priest. Just let that happen.
And now, and obviously it comes around and the mud falls on the FSSP, which, the FSSP does good work. The FSSP do good work. They offer these wonderful reverent masses. Their priests are great confessors and great preachers, and they do all these wonderful, wonderful things. But now, Kathleen is not unique. Kathleen coming along and saying, well, I don't know if I can trust these people anymore. I don't want to do this. Okay, you were an FSSP parishioner. She's not unique. There's probably dozens or hundreds of people like her whose faith has been destroyed. And you, Father, you had the ability to let this fall on you. And Christ's silence in the face of wackadoodle accusations. It's like the accusations actually leveled at Christ. They're not coherent. They don't make sense. This is why Pilate's sitting there as the judge under the Roman system. Pilate's like, yeah, I find no fault in this man. And essentially that's Pilate like, doing a very kind of, stoic, level little thing of like, y'all are crazy. Y'all are crazy. It's too early in the morning for this. What are you all doing? None of this makes sense. This is not what the judge in this case did. The judge is like, okay, so we've got evidence. So there's this evidence here, Father Jackson. Do you feel? Yeah, I agree. I agree the prosecution has probable cause to accuse me of this. Okay, that was the statement he made. Yeah. You want to talk about statements he made? He didn't stay silent. He admitted they had probable cause. Jesus is like, I'm not even answering these charges. And Pilate's like, yeah, dude, I kind of feel you, brah. It
took him a year, and it took him a second arrest to finally admit it, of course.
Yeah, and it's always, the worst part, as we're saying here now, is the damage control aspect. Just the humility it takes to just admit, okay, look, this is exactly what happened. And we should never take sides on all these things as they're developing and all. It's not what we want to do. We want to just objectively report, this is what's happening right now. This is what people are saying. There should be no taking sides and all this until it's done. But the damage control now is that these people just have to admit, okay, this is what happened. These are the brutal facts. These are things things that we need to make sure are not happening instead of just this tribalistic approach. And that's what keeps continuing to be the downfall of everyone. I don't even want anybody to say, oh, Church Militant's the only one reporting the facts. I don't want to hear that, because that means you're closing your eyes off to everything else. The second you think that, okay, there's this one group that I'm only going to listen to because they have all the facts, you're going to get that wrong 99% of the time. Because if everybody does that, if I'm Baptist and I'm only going to listen to this preacher, well, what happens when he's wrong? What happens whenever the truth was with somebody else? When you close your mind off and your ears off to everything that's going around, that's why, see, you're meant to know the truth. You were created to know the truth and to know, love, and serve God. And so you have to be constantly discerning, okay, what am I being told? I don't want people to just accept that everything that I say or you say is just blind fact. I want them to go look it up, go do some research. Then if I'm right, okay, cool, I was right, and I'm glad that I'm right, because I don't want to be sinning and saying things that are objectively false. But that's what you should be doing with everyone.
Yeah, I wish other news outfits would be reporting on this far, far more. In fact, for the past 3 years, I have practically begged my friends, my colleagues in traditional Catholic media, please report on this sex abuse. You're very good at reporting on the Novus Ordo clergy sex abuse. You will go on and on and on for pages about McCarrick and all of that. Why is it that there's just deafening silence about trad clergy sex abuse? One of the people that I've called out just this morning, again, is LifeSite News. Now, I haven't checked it within the last hour. Maybe they've updated their one article on Father James Jackson, which they published on June 2nd, simply announcing that he was going to go to trial on June 20th. I have searched high and low to their website to see they had all day yesterday evening, last night, to update the report, to talk about the guilty plea. I have seen nothing. I've seen nothing from Taylor Marshall on this. And it's like, come on, guys, come on. At some point, you are complicit in enabling abuse because you refuse to talk about it.
And you're complicit in the potential damnation of a man. How old is Jackson? Do you know?
He's in his
Roughly.
50s.
Okay, so he's in his 50s, so he's not an old man, but certainly, if you come along and you say the actuarial tables say you've got, what is it for a guy nowadays, like 75, 77, something like that? Okay, but you know what? We all know people who've lived to be in their 90s, but statistically, for every person who lives to be in their 90s, someone's going to drop dead in their 50s. Father Jackson is not living on borrowed time, but you know what? There's a very legitimate concern that you could drop dead. And you know what? People die all the time if they get run over by buses and these sort of things.
And go into prison for a crime like this?
Yeah, that's a second concern. But Father Jackson, death can come at any moment. And you have not admitted this, which means, did you confess it? Did you go to sacramental confession? Did you go to your confessor and say, hey, I did these terrible things that I'm now accused of within the secular justice system, and I accuse them? I don't know what a priest would say if he was the confessor to that, but I have to kind of imagine that if I went to my confessor and said, hey, I've committed some awful crime and I have been arrested for it and they're charging me for it, he would be like, okay, y'all got to plead guilty on this one. You don't drag this through. There are real victims that you're going to be dragging through the courts and the horror of a trial and stuff. Are you truly sorry? And I get it. Yeah, fine. You go to confession, you say, bless me, Father, for I've sinned, I lied, I cheated, I steal, whatever I did. He's not like, okay, you've got to go and proclaim that to the world. But when it's already a known thing, bless me, Father, for I've sinned, they've arrested me for tax evasion and they're right, yeah, you kind of need to plead guilty on that one. And you know what? I don't know. I'm not saying the man didn't go to confession. I'm not saying he didn't receive absolution. I'm just looking at it and going, you know what? If I went to confession for something and it was like a big public sin and I was publicly accused and there was a legal trial, I would be like, I've got to confess this for the confession to stick. Yeah. Maybe that's not theologically right. Maybe some theologian in the comments will tell me.
How contrite can you actually be if you're not actually apologizing publicly for your crime so that your flock understands what's actually going on? Instead, you're continuing to use them to raise money for you and your defense. Yeah,
it's part of the whole aspect of making reparation when you've done something wrong. And in many instances, good confessors will advise you to make reparation. And, I'm not his confessor. I'm not saying this is what he should actually do. But it seems to me that there should be some public statement that he's going to make as an act of reparation.
Mend what you have marred.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it really just speaks to this whole idea, and we've kind of alluded to this before, about pastor worship, you know, this cult of personality that takes place within many Catholic circles. But I saw this a lot when I was more involved in the Protestant realm before I came back to embrace my Catholic faith. I would see, you know, different churches that I would attend, and, you know, a pastor would leave or something like that, and it would be this huge uproar in the church. Like, well, do we go to his new church? And it would divide the congregation and whatnot. There was an incident here with a very traditional Catholic parish in the Archdiocese of Detroit where a priest simply got moved to a new diocese, and there was this big uproar. Do we still continue to go to the parish? Yeah, you still continue to go to the parish. It's not about the priest. So this cult of personality, this pastor worship, it's really upsetting. I actually had a good Protestant pastor that I used to know who would actually, he was honest about this situation. He would admit to his flock that, hey, you know, I could let you down in terms of my spirituality, in terms of my leadership. He's like, don't put your faith in me, put your faith in Christ. You might find out some weird, horrible thing about me one day, and don't let that scandalize you too much. Don't let it lose your faith. Your faith is not about your pastor, it's about Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, too, it's worth mentioning the whole RTF Mike Parrott saga, because that centered on this case specifically. It's the only defamation lawsuit the Church Militant has ever filed against anyone, and it was simply over the fact that back in November 2021, when I found out about this fundraiser, I started questioning the appropriateness of it, the wisdom of it. I just started questioning, just like any investigative journalist should do. And I sent him some questions saying, hey, what are you going to do with this money? How are you going to get access to the relevant physical
Because that
devices?
was the whole thing. That the fundraiser was not, and I think people need to understand this, the fundraiser wasn't simply we're going to raise some money and this is going to have a pot of money so that he can hire, Jackson can hire a good lawyer. It wasn't about that. Because obviously, you know, certainly you can get a public defender, but you know what? There is a name for people who have public defenders guilty. I mean, that's just the thing. They're overworked, they're underpaid. It's a whole thing. You know, the prosecution gets the lion's share of the glory, which is why you have, you know, your private law firm who comes in to defend you, and it isn't a very expensive business. Lawyers, you know, are an expensive profession, but it wasn't just for that. Parrott was saying that he was going to conduct a forensic computer review of Jackson's computer and hard drive and so forth. And of course, the question is like, how are you going to get your hands on physical evidence from a federal? I mean, that's a very legitimate question. How are you going to get your hands on this, or your forensic computer dude on this? You know, do you think the FBI isn't going to conduct its own review of this? Are they going to just hand over the thing?
Yeah,
you know, of course they're not.
That immediately threw red flags for me. I thought, okay, you're not even a party to the case. You admit you don't even know Father Jackson. You've never met him before. You don't know him. So why on earth? You're just a blogger. So why on earth would the feds hand over this criminal evidence to you that they're using to prosecute the priest in this federal criminal trial? Why would they do that? How do you plan on doing this? And instead of truthfully responding, he defames us, accusing us of blackmail and extortion, issuing threats to his family. He even says that we committed wire fraud. It was completely ridiculous. And we gave him about a week to take it down, because this was during our Baltimore rally. And we were actually getting phone calls, like phones were ringing off the hook here at the Apostolate from people saying, oh my gosh, I'm hearing all these horrible things from Mike Parrott. He's accusing you of all these terrible things. I'm canceling my subscription. You know, people just, I mean, we got flooded with this. And we said, hey, take this down. This is defamation. This is outrageous, or we're going to sue you. He ramped it up. We sued him, took about a year. He eventually lost. He had to issue a public apology, had to pay attorney's fees. But it all revolved around this Jackson case and this Jackson fundraiser. To this day, because people have asked me, so where did all that money go? $65,000 of it went to Jackson's attorney. He tried to get $5,000 of it back. He tried to get a kickback from the attorney. The attorney said no. Why? Because that would have been wire fraud. So Parrott tried to commit wire fraud, and then he gave $55,000 to an unlicensed investigator who had zero forensic computing experience. And we found all of this out during the deposition.
Did the investigator have any access to the material
Zero
evidence?
Zero access.
So there was no access, because I know there was a discussion that he may be able to get access to the files.
No,
but he couldn't access.
He got nothing.
Yeah, so there's the question, because sometimes people will say, you know, they get access to the files, and I remember this coming up, and there was a discussion of getting access to the files, and it's like, if you want to do an actual forensic audit, you need access to the physical hard drive itself, or you need an image of it, so that it's not just a question of what's stored on the hard drive, it's a question of what shadows and reflections and bits left over from what was previously stored on the hard drive, which is why you need the actual hard drive itself, or you need an image of it. And of course, didn't have access to that. There was no way the feds were going to hand that over. This, of course, is a thing. There is a thing within grown-up and real jurisprudence, which is called the chain of custody with regard to evidence. So when the police, and of course, if you watch police procedurals and stuff, I love police procedurals. I like them a great deal. When you watch them, of course, they grab evidence, and this is a thing that most TV shows do really badly. They just sort of grab the evidence and just go, oh, we've got the evidence, and then they walk off, and it's like, no! You take a photograph, you carefully document it, it goes into a particular bag, it's labeled, and then there's a paper that says, okay, you know, Officer Smith got this, and it was handed over to Detective Jones, and Detective Jones put it to, you know, Captain such and such in this, and it's very carefully done, and if that chain is broken at any point, defense lawyers are like, chain of custody broken, all your evidence is gone. It's out. I throw it out and it doesn't matter because you can't prove that you just didn't pull this out of a hat like a rabbit. And of course, that's why you wouldn't hand it over, because the moment you hand it over to a civilian, you've broken the chain of custody and your entire case falls apart. You know,
this is what I was trying to explain to people back in 2021. You know, just saying, listen, guys, this is not wise. This is not wise. He's taking your money and he won't be able to do with your money what he's promising he's supposed to do, which is, that's a violation of the law. If you set up some sort of charitable fund and you say, I'm going to earmark 50% of the donations for this particular purpose, and then you don't actually do that, you've broken the law. And I'm trying to warn everybody, guys, he's never going to get access to this evidence. And people just didn't want to listen to me. They were like, no, we're going to give money and we're going to defend Father Jackson, blah, blah, blah. And you guys are haters and just attacking tradition.
And that's why one of these things that, like this recent case with Bishop Olson and the Carmelite nuns, one, I haven't wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole because it's just so crazy every time something comes out. That's why every time we've talked about it, we have done the bare facts. Like, this is exactly what we know. Everything is like, okay, how do we write this to where it doesn't look like we're taking sides at all, because we're not, because we have no idea what the heck is going on. And that should have been the same approach with this for everyone. It should not have been this whole he's guilty or he's not guilty. Like, here are the facts. Like, of course, there are things that you can see in a case that makes it to where, like, okay, it's just the court has to convene, but of course everyone knows. We see it on video. He stabbed the woman. Like, right. We know he's guilty. We just have to wait for the court to say it. But one of the cases like this, where you truly just need to watch it play out, report the facts as it happens, just like this thing. Like, we don't think Bishop Olson is a great guy by any means. We've done a lot of reporting on him, but in this particular instance, he might not be at all this fault, and we don't know. It's a case-by-case thing. It's not, oh, this guy killed 7 people, so he had to have killed the 8th. No, he might not have, and you have to wait to find out.
No, that's exactly right, and it's so important to be unbiased in your journalism and objective. And that's what we're missing a lot, including in fellow trad Catholic media. It's this like hyper emotionalism. It's just this jumping to conclusions, because I know Bishop Olson got heavily attacked immediately by this, you know, the same suspects that you expect. And that download that we did on Bishop Olson in the nuns case, where we were just very objective, David Gordon's a fellow attorney with me, we're just very objective about what's going on and not really taking any sides. We actually got blasted from people. If you read the comments under that, either on YouTube or on our site, and emails too, people saying, shame on you, how dare you attack the nuns the way you did. Well, we didn't attack the nuns, we were just objective. But people have lost that objectivity.
Yeah, it's really just reporting the facts, and that's what we do. And it really strikes me as this is the whole conspiracy theory of, like, the government planted this stuff on his computers. Think of how, like, convoluted that is. Think of that, like, hundreds of people had to be involved with this, different government agencies, 2 different states, cybersecurity branches of the government. Like, all these people were somehow colluding to plant this thing on this one priest's computer. It doesn't even make sense. And twice in 2 different states. Yeah. Exactly. And then there's the whole claim of, well, Father Jackson was so bad at using technology, he couldn't even turn on his cell phone. But yet, what does the evidence show? It shows that he was using peer-to-peer file sharing capabilities, software. He was using torrents, which is like, okay, it takes a little bit of sophistication to know how to do this, and it looks like he, a lot of this stuff just wasn't readily available on his computer. They had to search through the computer. There's cached files, deleted files. So he had at least that acumen to try to scrub his computer. So this whole business about him being this like tech Luddite, I don't buy it at all.
Yeah, and I think as well, look, from a technological perspective as well, that it's not. This isn't Star Trek where you have like a guy who does science. There's the science officer in Star Trek, and he is an expert on every single form of science relating from xenobiology all the way up to repairing the warp core. That's not how it works. People who are technologically quite competent at using a particular form of technology, which is all this really is. This isn't some, great, amazing go into thing. It's like, okay, you can use a torrent, you can use a peer-to-peer system, you can use these various tools and devices. May be completely incompetent with regard to something else. There are people who are wonderful engineers, and they can do everything involving oil rig engineering. But you know what? You would not trust them, to run a bead on a weld. You just wouldn't trust them to do that because they're very different skill sets. And I think that's sort of what you're looking at as well. The man could barely turn on his cell phone. It's like, well, firstly, I don't believe that. The man is, in his mid-50s. He's 10 years older than me. I'm betting he can turn on his cell phone. And you know what? If he is engaging in this kind of behavior, which he's now, pled guilty to, that could be a blind. It could be a blind of just going around, I know nothing about technology, while he's sitting there, using these technologies in order to get hold of that, so people don't suspect him of being involved with that.
I think that's a possibility. I mean, people have said that's what some of these more sophisticated child predators do. They pretend that they really don't know that much about technology when they actually know quite a bit. And the fact that they found 12,000 images and 1,300 video files, it shows that this didn't happen overnight. This was happening over a long period of time. I actually spoke with a cyber cop. He devotes his time to catching predators online. So he's very familiar with cybersecurity, with how these sorts of things work, how hacks work and that sort of thing. And I explained the details of this case, that this 4-month sting revealed that not only was Father Jackson downloading porn onto his laptop, but that he was also uploading and distributing it. And so this cybersecurity guy said, okay, well, if you're just downloading it, there is the remote possibilities, though difficult, of hacking and planting and that sort of thing. But it completely changes once you're uploading and distributing. He said that's almost impossible to hack. There are two different things going on here. He said the uploading part and the distributing part, that is almost impossible to do.
Yeah.
So,
one thing that I want to, because we're running out of time here, but one thing I do want to talk about, and just actually sort of get people to think, and sort of the last thing to stick in their head, there are real people who are involved in this. Every single one of those images is of a real person. It is of a real person, of a child who is being abused, who is being hurt, who is being brutalized in the most horrific way. That we have discussed about victims of sex abuse, people who were victims of sex abuse when they were younger, older, etc., etc. And there's always a consequence, there's always damage to these people. This is an abuse, this is an attack. Those are real people in those images. This is not, some cartoon, this isn't some AI-generated thing, and no real people were harmed in this. This is not, some fake thing. These are real people who were abused and injured and utterly harmed by this. And so that is what you're looking at. When you're looking at 13,000, obviously, presumably, that's multiple thousands of children, not just one child being continuously abused. And the other thing that I want to end on here, Christine, and I'm probably going to be embarrassed by it, but you were attacked. I know I opened with that, and I'm going to close with it, because this is the thing. You are one of my people, and these, I'm going to say something that won't be allowed on our site, so I'm not going to say it, but these other individuals, they went after you for no reason whatsoever. They went after you because they had this thing in their head that, I've got to defend my tribe, I've got to defend my tribe, I've got to defend this. He couldn't have done it. Christine Niles must be a terrible person. Christine Niles is... Insert ethnic slur here. Seriously, Christine Niles' family comes from Vietnam. They were that close to getting out on the last flipping chopper from Hanoi. The communists took everything her family had, and no, what do? You wheel out the ethnic slurs. You wheel out the ethnic slurs. It's not even the right ones. You didn't even use I am done with this.
I think in my line of work, to be honest, I expect it. Obviously, it's wrong, but in my line of work, which is exposing some of the worst evil, then you just expect the backlash. But I want to focus for a moment on the victims here, because I've heard so many people say, we need to pray for Father Jackson. We need to pray for Father Jackson. Let's pray for Father Jackson. Yes, pray for Father Jackson. But you know what? Spare a prayer or two for the victims. How about that, guys? How about I see more prayers for the victims, more calls for prayers for the victims than for the victimizer? How about that?
Yeah, how about that? And, and how about you consider that, I get it, Christine, you say that this is, this is what I expect because I'm in this. You know what? You're working with Catholics. Every single person who attacked you, every single person who justified Father Jackson, every single person, this is not this case, but the SSPX, who actually posted things like, well, it's okay he did this because he says the Latin Mass. I've read it, I've seen it. Every single one of those people is supposed to be a Catholic. Every one of those people is a Catholic. They're supposed to be better. We wonder why nobody wants to join our church when this tawdry trash is what we deal with. I'm not happy. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Normally we're a little calmer. Now please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation, our church, and of course, the victims in this horrible case. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve, ad te clamamus exules filii Eve, ad te suspiramus gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ego advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for joining us for The Download. Thank you for following us on Church Militant. Thank you for all of your great support and reading our articles, sharing them around, etc., etc. We could not do what we do without you. We premiere a new episode like this, like I say, usually a little calmer, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, may God bless you.